Okay, I'm doing this from the road this week. I'm on a little family vacation, and so I'm pulling this off from a hotel. But I just wanted to point out that, as always, whenever I talk to Paul Schreiber, it's pretty amazing. And I know some of this stuff intersects with what we did in his first interview. But one of the things I find with Paul is that every time I talk to him about something, new stuff is revealed. So I think that you'll find this super interesting. It's really cool to hear about how MOTM kind of ran its course for Paul. It was really cool, but also it's really interesting to hear his take on the failings of Radio Shack. The guy was involved with the Tandy Corp for a long time, and so just hearing him kind of reminisce about what that was like is pretty amazing as well. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I'll catch you on the backside. Okay, this week I come to you. I'm actually recording this on late on a Wednesday evening. Nice little glass of wine next to me, and one of my favorite people to talk to in the MI industry. We are going to have our second visit with Paul Schreiber. For those of you who haven't heard the earlier podcast, go back and listen to episode number 13, which was one of our most popular podcasts. Once you get that under your belt, come on back and listen to this. That'll give you some of the history. Today we're going to be talking about more about sort of the process of creating a modular synth company, especially at a time when it was an unknown entity. So with that, I want to say again hello to Paul Schreiber. Paul, good evening. How are you?
Thanks, Darwin. Glad to be back for number 2.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you too. People really love to hear you weave your tales. You've lived you've lived out an amazing life here, and so we want to make sure that we can document a bunch of it because people seem to be really hungry for it. So one of the things that I want to talk about is the process of developing the MOTM company. You have, I'm not sure where I read it, but I read something where you talked about your initial desire to get into this was to, pick up some interesting stuff. And in our earlier podcast, you talked about the desire to get a stereo was a really was a leveraging part of why you got into it. But I would say that you set the stage for a lot of stuff in the modular world that has since become kind of standardized. So the first one I would say, and the way I remember it in the old days, is that you were really focused on providing kits as opposed to fully built items. I mean, you would do built items, but it seemed like the focus was on doing kits. Am I remembering that correctly?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, the original idea was to do a modern version of Elektra Notes, which, everybody familiar with analog design back in the 70s and the 80s was the number one source to get actual circuits that worked. And this was a newsletter that a PhD candidate at the time at Cornell University, Bernie Hutchins, would mail you pretty much every month. It was kind of sporadic, but he did a pretty good job. This was pre-typesetting. It was all hand-typed on a typewriter, hand-drawn schematics, printed on Xerox paper, mailed, folded in half with nothing glossy or, no advertisements to speak of. And it was incredibly cheap at the time. It was like $7 a year or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very popular because he made it very clear that everything in that magazine was pre-tested. So it wasn't like going to a national semiconductor application book and grabbing random schematics and discovering they didn't work because they were designed by co-op students. So instead, you could pretty much guarantee everything in there worked. And so I kind of missed that. And growing up, of course, before that, was putting Heath kits together and things like that. What I wanted to do was have a the next step was you would subscribe to my version of it, and not only would you get the same kind of thing, you would get a blank circuit board.
Right.
And this blank circuit board would then be a module that you could build, and it would be a fairly high-quality module. Even though back then we didn't have access to low-cost overseas circuit boards, and we're talking the late 90s, 96, 97, 98 time frame,
Mm-hmm.
you could still get boards made locally in Dallas for about $7 a piece.
Okay.
And so my plan was to charge something like $15 and come out maybe 4 to 6 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of the first year, you would have a little mono synth, for example.
Right.
Now, but I wasn't going to do a power supply. You know, power supplies are always a big bugaboo, and there's a big thread on Muffler right now about Eurorack power supplies.
Mm-hmm.
And because the problem is you have to deal with legal ramifications with UL in the
Right.
United States. And so it was going to be left as an exercise to the user. So that was my original plan, was not even do full kits, okay? Just do the circuit boards. And so I was thinking about doing that, but then after I talked to some people, you know, I'd realized that not everybody knows about Mouser and DigiKey and can read resistor color codes and things like that. So I decided, well, I'm probably not going to sell very many, so I'll just go ahead and sell the kits, you know, fully, every single part, including the front panels, which also was a big worry because, number one, I have no artistic ability at all, and number two, they tend to be quite expensive, and as I found out later doing MOTM, they talk about the infamous let's change the paint. People get real particular about the appearance of their modular. And this was one of the factors I learned early on, is that I was focusing on the sonic and electrical qualities, and other people were arguing about the font.
Right. Right.
What I did is that was my local PC board company, which is actually run by a friend of mine, and asked them what the minimum they would run for me, and it turns out they wanted 100 boards.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's $700, and I'm like, you know, I don't know if I want to sell 100.
Right.
And you have to remember, this was before PayPal. The next thing I worried about was, how are people going to pay me?
Right.
At that time, it was all done with money orders. There wasn't this big fraudulent. Now you think about money order, you think about some guy with a laser, you know,
You're going to
printer.
get ripped off, right? Exactly.
You're going to get ripped. Yeah, when you say, I'll send you a money order, people say, no way. But back then, that was like the most stable thing people could do was money orders.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so that's how I started. So I basically started by saving my money and putting an ad in a magazine, which I don't know if it's still out. It was called Nuts and Volts.
Yeah, it actually, well, I say that. I bought a copy like a year ago, so at least a year ago It was still around.
All right, so Nuts and Volts is like a magazine. It's not the right term. It's more like a newspaper-ish kind of thing, like the old computer shopper used to be.
Right.
It's on newsprint.
Right.
But they had a little classified ad section, and I put a little ad in there, and it cost $90. And I'm just thinking, God, everything is so expensive in this business. I'm never going to do it.
Right.
But that's how I got started. And the first thing that I offered was the MOTM 110 BCA. Now, the reason I was going to do MOTM at all, besides getting my stereo, was the fact that about a year earlier, I was doing work with Doug Kurtis on a custom ASIC for a Radio Shack voltmeter.
Okay.
And I was actually at his house having dinner, and he mentioned that he had a bunch of cool stuff in an outbuilding. His wife at the time had horses, and it was basically part of the horse barn. And we went back there, and he had like his college stereo, like a Piatt 3340 and a Sansui SU 9000 and AR3A speakers and all kinds of, shades of 1974 kind of stuff. But over in the back corner, there's this huge box labeled Kurtis Chips /bad. And so I'm like, hey, what's that? He goes, well, that's all my Kurtis Chips I got, when the business kind of went bad. I put them in there. I said, it's bad? He goes, no, I just wrote that on there. So it turns out that we dig this thing out. I think it was like an Allen Heath mixing console, squishing the box down. And I pull it out, and there's probably 20,000 Kurtis Chips in there.
Oh, my goodness.
And so, of course, I'm like, what are you doing? I stick them in the box in the garage. And he's like, well, they've been written off my taxes, and I can't sell them, to my corporation, and I hate to throw them away, but, the DX7 basically killed it.
Right.
And I said, well, I'll take them, and I'll test them, and just give them to me. And so that's how we kind of did it. So we had like this handshake 50-50 agreement where I would sell the Kurtis Chips, and then I was thinking, I want to basically redo the old DigiDesign, whatever it's called. What's it called? The one in England, the Digi 80. I forgot what the whole thing was.
Oh,
DigiSound.
Yeah.
The DigiSound 80. So the DigiSound 80 was a series of modules that were done in a magazine over in England that each one used a Kurtis chip.
Right.
So they weren't very exciting. They were essentially taking the Kurtis app note and putting a panel and jacks in front of it. They really didn't try to embellish it that much, but it was a very easy thing because it's like, oh, one chip VCO, one chip VCF, one chip VCA.
Sure.
And so that's what I was thinking about doing. It's like, oh my God, I can do this so easily. Well, when people found out I had these, I started talking about them, people were aghast. How dare you use these chips in a modular? You need to keep them to preserve, the synths that are out there.
Right. Oh, man.
And so I was in a quandary because that was my whole business plan was I want to use these chips, and immediately there was this backlash,
yeah.
Okay, about, you should use them for the greater good of the Matrix 12.
That's a dubious thing right there.
But what's ironic about this is that I probably made more money because I listened to that, because it turns out that these chips were basically given to me for free. Right. I was selling for $90 a piece.
Yeah, it's funny because you say that, and I had forgotten that for many people, MOTM wasn't your primary business. Your primary business to them was you were the guy who still had Kurtis chips.
Right. Yeah. And that's how I actually, my first website was just selling the Kurtis chips, and I bought a scanner. Back then you could actually buy scanners, and they were $900 a piece. And took 35 minutes to scan one page. And I made a website, by myself, with a JavaScript and HTML books in my lap, and hacked up this website just to sell the Kurtis chips, okay?
Right.
But it turns out that, of course, the story I told about that was I gave people about a 4-month warning once I actually physically got the chips in-house and had them sorted out and figured out, what I actually had. So I primed the pump pretty well with, the analog haven mailing list and SDLI for the prominent methods to convey this information. And then I, had to find a website, and this is back when websites were fairly expensive. They, a cheap website back then was probably, a hosting service was probably $100 a month. And got it all set up. Then I went out and bought a bunch of boxes, and I bought sheets of foam, and I bought Avery labels, and I was ready to go. And I finally got excited because what I had done is asked people, if you're really serious about buying Kurtis chips, and I actually told people what the prices were, send me an email just so I can get an idea, okay? And so in the 4 months I did that, I had over 900 emails.
Oh, man.
Now, so here's what I figured. Half of the people are crazy, so cut it down to 450. Of those, half the people won't have the money when I'm ready. Okay? So cut it down to 225. Okay? And then half the people want them, but they'll find some excuse, so cut it down to about 100 people. I expected to get 100 orders.
Right.
Immediately. All right? Because
Right.
I had things like, I've had a Prophet 5 that's been dead for 5 years, and I've got blah, 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 name every synth ever made with the Kurtis chip in it. And people look, I was like the savior of the world of analog synths, okay?
Right.
So I remember the day. It was like 2 in. I'd worked like all day Saturday to put the website up because I didn't know what I was doing. I finally got it going. There's no e-commerce or even a shopping cart. It was basically click this form and type it in and tell me what you want.
Right.
Okay? And then I'll wait for your money order to show up. Right? I went to bed happy knowing that when I was going to wake up, I was going to have at least 30 or 40 orders. Okay?
Right.
Then my computer opened it up, and I had 0 orders. So I'm like, maybe it's broken. So I started immediately buying stuff for myself to make sure it was actually working.
Right.
No, it's working fine. So the moral of the story was, in the first week of having the Kurtis chips for sale, I had 3 orders.
Why is that?
Because I found out that's the first lesson of the internet when doing your own company. Talk is cheap.
Okay.
Okay? You have a very, your sold-to-noise ratio on the internet, on all forums, including ones today, and that's Facebook and, say, things like Muffler, Sonic State. The noise, your noise floor, I'm thinking it was maybe good Dolby C noise reduction, we'll give it 70 dB down, and it's more like 10 dB down. Okay? It's just like, a tenth of it's only the tenth of the signal there. So I was shocked, and part of me was kind of like panicked, but after a while it did take off. I think some of it was people were just very suspicious because it's almost like a story too good to be true. It'd be the same equivalent if someone said, I went to this old guy next door who was throwing away some stuff, and it turned out that he was the Roland rep back in the 70s, and he gave me 50 TB303s in the box.
Right.
You would just, people couldn't wrap around the fact, and I actually bought a camera and took pictures of the chips just to kind of convince people
that it was
trying
real.
to spam them.
Right.
But once it caught on, the sales of the Kurtis chips 100% funded all of my MOTM work for almost 10 years. And so that was very good, and I got spoiled because I didn't have to front anything for a new module because I knew there was enough Kurtis chip sales behind it to fund it.
Sure.
So I didn't have to have, module B be funded by module A, and I hope that I can sell enough A to make B, then I can't do C until I sell more B.
Right.
I didn't have that issue at all. I never thought about it for a second. So luckily, the Kurtis chips, did it. And I probably, over a 10-year period, sold around, $200,000 worth of Kurtis chips.
My goodness. So when did you run out?
I didn't run out. What happened was, after Kurtis died, I had no legal, the deal that we had, even though it wasn't formal, his
Right.
family knew about the deal, and so I was contacted, and I returned all of the parts at their request. And I did not know what happened to the parts.
Wow. I didn't know that
And
part of
so,
the story. Wow. When did that happen? When did he die?
I can't remember. I don't like to remember bad things.
Yeah,
I couldn't even tell you the day my father died. I just tend not to remember those kinds of things.
Okay.
But as a footnote to that deal was, I would pay Doug, since I wasn't allowed to pay money per se. He's kind of like me. He didn't even own any synthesizers. Okay.
Oh.
So he wanted to be paid with synthesizers that used his parts, and so I would simply keep track, and I had a spreadsheet, and I kept track of every single part, and I was very ethical, and I said, Doug, this is how much I owe you, what do you want? And he would say, I've always wanted 2 Matrix 12s. And so I would go and I would find, the people who had the pristine, and there's a couple of people I won't name, but some of them aren't well known on purpose, and these are the people who supply professional musicians. Okay, they're not
Right.
on eBay selling gear.
Right.
And these people, if it has a scratch an eighth of an inch long on the end panel, they're not interested.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be dead mint. And so, I would find a Matrix 12, and the guy would say, yeah, I've got one. It's $9,000. I said, here's my FedEx number.
Right.
I didn't care because it wasn't my money.
Right.
It was his money he had, and so he didn't care because it was free. It was a free Matrix 12 for him.
Sure.
He gave me a box, and a year later, Matrix 12 shows up. What kind of a?
How much better does it get?
Right?
Right? Yeah. Exactly.
Right. How much better does it get? Well, when it ended, he still had a balance of roughly $36,000 that I owed him.
Okay.
And of course, I couldn't pay him anymore, obviously. So I had to pay his wife, and so in order to pay his wife, I had to sell my Moog 55.
Oh.
And so
That's what happened to your Moog.
I lost my Moog 55 to pay the money I owed, but I sat there for a whole weekend, and I made sure I paid him to the penny, and I didn't feel that bad. I mean, I can't complain because where do you think I got the money to buy the Moog 55 to begin with?
Right.
So,
now, I mean, one of the things that I find really interesting is the extent to which you, probably more than anyone in the business, is like ultra honest when it comes to business dealings. And, you as well as I know that the MI industry is rife with exactly the opposite. People who will shave every corner possible to get an edge.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't have much dealing in the MI industry per se because I don't want to really be in that.
Right.
I mean, I had enough of shaving corners with my days at Tandy to last me a lifetime. And that was the other impetus for doing MOTM a certain way, was that there is truly an art to designing things as cheap as possible. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But mentally, it kind of gets old after a while because your wings are clipped. Okay.
Right.
Because you're always looking over the fence, admiring some new part that you'll never get to use because you're on the other side of the fence that says, we can't afford that.
Right.
And so MOTM was basically, I don't care what it costs. Okay, I'm not interested in it. I just want it to be high end.
Sure.
But I didn't think at the time that high end was addressed. And so that's how I started. Now, of course, ironically, the first module I ever did was the MOTM 110 dual VCA, followed by the MOTM 101 noise sample and hold. The 110 VCA, of course, has a Kurtis 3330 in it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the only one I ever did. And that's because I had a tough time finding CA 3280s, which are the high-end dual OTA, but they had already been discontinued, and people were hoarding them.
Right.
As they hoard them today.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I used. But I went out of my way, and I didn't do the oscillator. Of course, I had 3340s. In fact, 3340s, the VCO chip, was what I had the most of, because he had received them as shipbacks from Moog. They literally took screwdrivers and pulled them out of memory mode boards.
Okay.
Yeah, and half the pins were bent. And so I had probably at one time, when I first started, I probably had 15 or 20,000 VCO chips.
Oh my goodness.
So I could have had lots of VCOs, but the thing about the 3340 is designed to be in a computer system so that you can auto-tune it. It's not exactly temperature stable.
Right.
You're supposed to poke it every now and then, okay?
Okay.
So that's what it's designed to do. It's in the Prophet 5 where you kind of poke it every now and then. Of course, what's interesting now is Vince Clark came out today and says, I've got some Eurorack modules. Well, poke your VCOs. Of course, they're $590 a set.
Right, yeah, I saw those notices. That's hilarious.
You know, for $590, I'll hire an intern. Sorry, Vince, I know you're a customer. I'm just kidding. Please buy more stuff. My children starve. So what I did was I started looking through my Elektra Notes and looking at some other stuff I had and trying to come up with some designs that were high-end, but I did have one restriction because I was thinking I have to have parts that people can get, or I'll offer the hard parts separately. Like, here's a board, and here's the tricky parts for another $25. Here's the tricky part.
Right.
That was my intent, but then people said, oh, I love the solder, but I don't know how to buy resistors, and I don't want to buy 200 resistors. Like, at the time, if you went to Mouser and DigiKey, you bought a bag of resistors, or 200 in a bag.
Right.
Well, I don't need 200 resistors. I just need one. And my wife says that I use too much of her, sewing table. So I said, fine. So what I did was I went to the local community college, and that has a 2-year electronic technician's degree, and they have a placement office, and I asked for names of people who are looking for jobs. And so I interviewed some people, and I actually had some people who would come to my house during the day. I actually worked out of my house on my real job, because this has always been a hobby. Even today, it's a hobby. Mm-hmm. And they would sit there and count parts in bags. But that doesn't seem like a tough job. Okay, sit here, and here's a bunch of bags, count, and here's a list of resistors, and here they are. Count the resistors and put them in the bag. It was a disaster. Because what happens is, it's a boring job that you have to make 100.
Right.
Okay? If you don't make 100, someone's going to send you an email or post on the forum that I'm a crook because I shorted you a 1K resistor.
Right.
And my favorite story about that is I had a customer on the island of Malta, and actually had to look up where the heck is Malta. Okay, it's a little island. It's off the coast of Sicily or something. And how he's on the island of Malta, I have no idea. But I sent him a kit, and I was short one 10K resistor. He actually said, and I went to there's one Radio Shack on the island of Malta, and they don't sell resistors anymore. So I actually sent him 3 resistors taped on my business card. And I was like, I'm going to go broke sending resistors to everybody. So I actually had to fire all of I had 4 people at the time. I kept the one good guy. Other 3 I had to let go because they couldn't count resistors or screws or knobs in a bag accurately. At the end of my kitting days, when I finally got rid of the MOTM kits and said I wasn't going to do it, and that was in 2006, I calculated roughly, this wasn't accurate, but it's fairly accurate, I'll say plus or minus 10%, I put 1.8 million parts in little plastic bags.
Oh, my God.
Myself, personally, me, 1.8 million. And I think I had a pretty good track record doing that, but it's not a good use of my time.
Right.
I just got tired of it. And in fact, that's another kind of interesting story about that is, if for people who had the MOTM kits, there was another person who provided kits at the same time who was obviously saving bags because he would dump every single part in one bag. Literally. You would get a bag and had every part in it. And people didn't like that. So what I did was I did the exact extreme, being me. I put all the resistors in a bag, the caps in a bag, the wires in a bag, the knobs in a bag, the pops in a bag, the jacks in a bag. So the solder, actually I even provided solder because I'm real picky about my solder. So I told people, you have to use this solder and I'll give you the solder.
Right. That actually got to be kind of part of the mythology behind the MOTM kits, was that they were so complete they even came with a little spool of solder. You know, it actually sort of like added to the story of quality, right?
Well, because I was afraid that people were going to go use rosin core, Kester 44 solder, which for people who follow baseball, how do you dry your hands off? You use solder, okay? It collects water. What do you rub your violin bows down to get the moisture off your bow so it can click on the strings? Use you rosin up the bow.
Right.
So why would you solder with something that collects water? The technical term is bad idea. All right. But the problem is that's what people are used to because they don't know that there's actually about 17 different kinds of solder you can buy. They just never knew that. So part of the deal was I was going to show people, how to do it. You have a problem, right? You have two different kinds of solder my kits. You have the solder that is based with organic flux, which is a form of vinegar that you actually wash off with water. Of course, you've told your whole life electronics and water don't mix, because that was a odd thing. And then for the wires, I had no clean solder, which you don't need to wash off, okay? But
right.
When you look at it, it looks the same. So what I came up with is I thought this is the most clever thing I ever did in all of MOTM land was I made the organic solder a different wire gauge. It was a smaller gauge than the no clean solder. So the thickness of the solder, which one was which.
Right. Interesting.
I thought that was clever. Nobody else does, but I thought I was surprised that people got over the fact that they could actually wash boards in water because that's what you do in industry. Okay?
Right.
You wash boards in water at the time. Now, when you use rosin core solder back in the old days, you had to use horrible things that destroyed the ozone, like carbon tetrachloride.
Right.
Or Freon, okay? And so that's what it takes to get the solder, get the rosin off the board, is you wash in carbon tetrachloride. So not only do you kill the ozone layer, you die of cancer. It's a win-win for everybody.
Right.
There. That was something I was trying to show people, and I was surprised that, I don't know the exact number. It's around 9,200 kits were sold. Less than 5 ever came back that were so bad that I secretly laughed at the people, and I sent them a whole new kit.
I was going to ask about that because I would think that you would have been put in the position of sort of debugging builds that were just outrageous.
No, and I thought about that, and then there were some people on the list who said, what is the resale value of a strange person building one of these MOTM modules who you don't know if, what they're doing. I mean, in other words, if somebody says, I built this module myself from a kit 2 years ago, and I have a child, and I want to sell my modular, and so I'm selling this VCO for $200. The question was, oh my God, it looks like maybe it got dipped in solder or something.
Right.
But it turns out that people loved solder, kind of like people love to paint or love to read, all right? And that's another thing that's caught me off guard was I had people complaining, kind of half serious, but half kidding, half serious, but they were serious, complaining that my modules didn't have enough parts. In other words, they were too quick to be built.
Right.
They wanted bigger boards with more parts so they could solder. And it became this obsession with some people about, I want 5,000 resistors to solder, please. Can't you come up with something more complicated? And I'm like, why do I want to do that? So I can count more. So I can just count more
parts. Right. Exactly.
All I could just see in front of my eyes was, maybe I'll hit 5 million parts one day. Won't that be special? Each kit took 12 plastic bags in it. Okay, I bought 120,000 plastic bags. I mean, that's a lot of plastic bags in landfill and stuff. So
right.
it just became this huge I had a 2-car garage with no cars in it because they're full of plastic bags.
Right.
And so there's always a why factor in all these side businesses. There's always, how much money can you make to counteract the wife being upset that she can't get her car in the garage?
Right, exactly. Sure.
Kind of a thing. But over the years, the kits took off, and I think part of it was because of the .com boom, not the company, the economic factor.
Right.
Around 2000, people had money.
Right.
Okay. And they had money to do. It was unique. I was starting to get a reputation. I started buying ads. I felt like I had made it when the year I went to NAMM, I had an ad in Keyboard Magazine.
Right.
And so I was like, I'm like a real person, I'm a real company kind of a thing, which was always kind of a big deal for me. I always kind of wanted to, my father had his own company my whole life. And although I kind of watched it crash and burn, I was kind of skeptical about putting all my eggs in that basket, still am even today. It was a very good feeling to know that I was, quote, legit.
Sure.
I was legit. I was getting reviews. Mark Vail was very kind to me over the years, putting stuff in the magazines for me. And Robert Rich, the ambient artist, was very kind. He gave a wonderful review in some magazines that made my sales go through the roof. And I couldn't keep up for years and years and years,
Yeah, well, and I want to actually come back to that because that is sort of, I feel like there's the modular landscape right now is a completely different place, and some of it is because it used to be that if you wanted to build modular instruments, you were actually dealing in an environment of fairly great scarcity, right? There were very few opportunities to just say, I want an oscillator, and click your heels and have an oscillator appear.
Right. You didn't have, as we have today. If you probably go to Mod for Grid, there's probably 40 different oscillators.
Right.
So now you have the opposite problem, right? You have the problem of, I don't have any oscillators, so how can I possibly pick one of these 40 oscillators?
Right, exactly.
It's like going to a high-end grocery store, Whole Foods or so ever, and you go in and they have 17 kinds of mustard.
Right.
And your wife says, bring me some mustard. And you go, oh boy.
Overwhelmed.
I'm overwhelmed by the choices of oscillators. Yeah, it was, you always had Piatt was always there. And,
when you first got started, what was the modular landscape? So, the Surge stuff had always continued to be built, so that was sitting in the background. Who else was selling modular stuff at the time?
It was essentially Surge and Piatt, and that was it.
Yeah.
That was essentially, and Blaze it.
Oh, that's right.
I think Blaze was kind of still in it. I can't remember exactly. We're talking 97, 98.
Mm-hmm.
So it was virtually that was it. Okay, that was it. And of course, right after I came out, then that's when .com also started.
Right, a bunch of things kind of popped up then. .com started selling 5U stuff. I was working with Grant Richter, and he Wired popped up, and .com popped up, and then Depfer popped up around then too, right?
Oh, Depfer, yeah, he started, but I wasn't even looking that way. Okay, if I saw it, I kind of went, it went somewhere else. Okay,
right.
So now here's karma, hit me over the head with a baseball bat. but yeah, I'm always focused on my own thing. That's kind of interesting is I don't spend a lot of time, even today, worrying what other people do.
Right.
Okay? I kind of have my own vision, and because it is a hobby, I don't have to and I really need the money. Don't get me wrong, everybody. Please buy my stuff, but it's not necessary. Okay, I'm not making mortgage payments. I'm not making car payments. I'm not, feeding my family. I'm using this money for saving and to put my son through college without loans, and that's basically it. So instead of having a stereo, I want to have a son who graduates without a single, college loan payment.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Emphasis for right now. So I don't wring my hands over the retail price of plus or minus $10. I don't wring my hands over if I don't sell X amount by this date, things are going to get really tough around the Schreiber household.
Sure.
So I have a luxury. When I had MOTM, my luxury was I have all these Kurtis chips. Okay, I can just live off the Kurtis chips.
Right.
Because I slowly started ramping, and as I started selling more, I kept jacking the price up, and it didn't seem to affect the demand. People realized that they were legit. They weren't counterfeit. They weren't. I wasn't killing old synthesizers to harvest the guts. There was some concern there.
Yeah.
And so I was running fairly well. The trouble with MOTM kits was I was running out of things to build that I wanted to spend the time on. If that makes sense. For example, people are asking me, why don't you build like a sequencer, like a 960 sequencer? And all I can think of, oh my God, look at all those pots and knobs.
Right.
Well,
of
course, everybody knows my pots and knobs, together it costs $5. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm going to write a check for $40,000 for pots and knobs. I don't think so.
Right.
The
other thing, though, that sort of towards a lot of your later modules were kind of heavy digital, like the, is it the 650? That's the
right. That's the biggest CV converter. So
yeah,
at the 650, I started to go surface mount because I found a local contractor who could do surface mount fairly cheap. Now, I say fairly cheap. It's not like it is today, which is very, very inexpensive. But it was cheap enough where I could sell a $500 module and still make good money, doing it surface mount. And so I kind of said, that was the first time I said, you know what, it's not going to be a kit. It's just going to be assembled, and here it is. But it's really cool. And I still had some people who were like, I'm not buying it because I'm not building it.
Oh, right.
I don't care how cool it is. Hands crossed on chest, glaring. How dare you come out with something I can't build?
Right.
And I'm just like, dude, get a grip. So, I went through that. So, so MOTM, I suppose, in all honesty, ended kind of rough. Okay, it was a combination of my patience was wearing a little bit thin. I had lost the Kurtis chips. Okay, so Doug had died, and I had lost the Kurtis chips, and I was not interested in sitting literally 20 hours on my weekends counting parts.
Right.
It kind of came to a head in 2006 when I had lost 2 jobs in 2 years. I had moved twice in 2 years, and I said, okay, I sent out a notice to everybody. This is the end of the kits. All right. Kept a very good spreadsheet about how many kits I had sold, and pretty much what had happened is everybody had already bought 40 of everything.
Right.
Okay. I didn't have that many total customers. Okay. I had a spreadsheet that every single customer had a customer number. Actually, customer number 1 is still a good friend of mine. He's still around, still has the system. He hasn't sold it. He's still customer number 1. But I didn't have, like I have today, where people have, thousands and thousands of customers.
Right.
Right. I had less than 500 customers.
Really?
A total, yes. Yeah. So it wasn't that many, but they bought lots and lots of modules. Okay. So I'm trying to stall here as I pull this thing up, but the other thing I found out doing MOTM is a lot of people were initially very excited about the idea of building their own modular, but due to all kinds of circumstances, they were always what I would call one and done.
Oh, right.
Meaning they would place an order, and they may place an order for, say, six modules and a power supply. Something that's actually pretty nice and decent, right?
Right.
And I would never hear from them again.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my story. A little bit more than I thought. Sorry. 604 total customers.
Okay.
So there were 604 people who bought MOTM from me. Of those 604 people, 1/3 were one and done.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take the number of total modules sold for the number of customers, what's interesting is that number never changed in 13 years.
Oh, that's interesting. So people just had gravitated towards a certain size, which was what?
That was 12.
Oh, really?
And yes, and 12 is what it takes to basically build an ARC 2600 clone.
Right.
But that's a false metric. If you take away the people, because I had many people who ordered a power supply, rails, and one module, and never ordered again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like their wives said, "What the heck is that? That's not going in my living room." Or they lost their job, or they went to somewhere else. The people who actually were what I'll call serious users, the average is up around 30 modules.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. So
That makes sense.
If you talk to my people who are serious, the average is 30. And of course, people always ask, well, who has the most modules? Okay. And as far as I know, that person, I'm not naming him, but he's fairly well known. He's a professional in the computer gaming industry. Okay. He makes soundtrack for computer games. Right. And he has around 200 modules.
Okay.
And I have about 6 people who have between 90 and 200. Okay. So they have very large systems. But most people have around 20. So I didn't have to worry about selling to thousands and thousands of people. I sold really and truly. I had a core group of about 200 people who I could count on to buy multiples of everything I ever did. Right. And I was perfectly happy with that. And at the end of the day, it's all said and done, it's around 10,000 kits versus assembled. Right. The ratio is about 10 to 1. For every 10 kits, I sold one assembled module. Okay. Because my assembled modules were very expensive because I sat there and built them. Right. Well, which would seem like to be a nice, pleasant thing from counting parts until you built your 17th VCO and you go, I think I'll go count some parts. Right. Right. And then, of course, that's when I started on the assembled stuff to have lifetime warranty. Okay. That's kind of a marketing thing. And actually, this week, I repaired an MOTM VCO that was built in 2002.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
So now there's going to be a point where I'm not simply going to be able to get the parts anymore. Okay. I mean, I can't offer a warranty if I physically can't get the parts. So now I'm back to trying to figure out how to handle that. But the MOTM line was, I probably had the best loyal customer base I could ever hope for. They were die-hard, defend to the death kind of people that, sometimes took it to a little extreme. I got a letter from the Environmental Protection Agency one November saying that the paint that I use on my modules was going to be not banned, but they said severely restricted in the method of application, all right, which means you had to have these kinds of vents, and you had to wear a hazmat suit.
Oh, okay, all right.
Mary had a little lamb 3 times while turning counterclockwise, and all these rules to spray this paint. It's called Polane paint. It's a 2-part polyurethane paint made by Sherwin-Williams that you actually have to bake in an oven. Okay. And I like Polane paint, so I'm like, oh, cool. And they sent it to me in November, and it took effect January the 1st. So, of course, the first thing I did is I panicked, and I placed this huge order for panels with my panel supplier, who was in Seattle, Washington. Mm-hmm. $17,000 the front panels. Okay. Which I didn't even have $17,000, but I placed the order anyway. And then I had to find a substitute. Well, the substitute I found was a powder coat. A powder coat isn't technically even paint. Powder coat is basically crunched up crayons that you melt on metal and it kind of looks like paint.
Right.
But I found a finish that was similar to the finish I had, and ironically, it made the white silk screen look even better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Contrast was better. It was a little bit matty. And I told everybody, I said, look, I did not wake up and say, you know what, I think I'll change the paint today. Right now, I have a letter from the EPA, and my supplier's not going to supply it to me, and I'm going to change it, and panic ensued. And I actually had one person who ordered 60 blank panels of the old paint.
Oh.
Just so they could screen their own things later down the road and still have the paint managed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so...
How far off was it in terms of matching?
I thought it was fairly close. I mean, from a distance, you couldn't tell. If you were 6 feet away, you couldn't tell. But, I didn't even try. Over the years, I've had people come to me and say, you don't have to use these Taito knobs. There's clones in China. No one will ever know. I said, my customers will know.
Oh, yeah, right, absolutely.
And my customers sit there, and part of the aura of the Modular is the appearance. It's like studio furniture. I mean, we all like to be surrounded by our cool-looking gear, and they don't want me to deviate it, especially after 12 years of doing it one way,
right?
And then all of a sudden change in the middle of the stream. But I really think back finally on my MOTM days, and I am going to have a Kickstarter program this fall to see if there's still interest in doing some of my current designs in MOTM and 5U and the .com MU format.
Right.
To see if I can raise enough money. I don't want to front the money, but to see if there's an interest. So stay tuned this fall for my Kickstarter program, and hopefully it'll be partially as successful as Exploding Kittens card decks. If you don't know that reference, go to Kickstarter and type in Exploding Kittens.
Now, you ended up, one of the results of being relatively an early player is that you ended up sort of defining a standard. And your standard was, first of all, a plate size of certain dimensions and the location of the screw holes and stuff like that, but also sort of this very clear gridding system for the for location of the knobs and the jacks.
The MOTM love it or hate it grid system, and
exactly.
And the grid system was done purely to make the modules uniform for the builders. It had nothing to do with the aesthetics. It had nothing to do with I wanted to look like a giant mixing board or I was copying the Aries system. It was the fact that I wanted my builders to build a VCO, and it had the same connections as the VCS. It had the same connections as the VCA. It was to make the building easy. If I had started MOTM strictly as an assembled system, it would not look that way. It would not look that way.
Really? Because I tend to think of it as being, you talk about your users as being very particular, and it seems like the adherence to that grid system is almost like an honoring of that sort of sensibility.
Well, I mean, certainly all my jacks will be at the bottom. Okay, I'm still one of the few people who advocate, jacks at the bottom.
Right.
And that's even true on my Eurorack modules. I don't like putting jacks next to the pot that it turns because then the cables get in the way. I like jacks at the bottom, but I probably would have moved the knobs around. I probably would have used more than one kind of knob size. I probably would have used some graphics a little bit differently. Okay? So it would look more like, an MU system that has jacks mainly on the bottom.
Right.
But I had no desire to have the silver delineations on the modules like the Mauve does, because I think that's a specific they call it a trade dress in the industry. That's a very specific Moog trade dress.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to imply or copy that trade dress. So I kind of went after my own boring black and silver white kind of look. But again, it was made so that the kit people were happy. That's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about, I don't want to have the nightmare scenario of having 50 kits a week come back, mangled.
Right.
Like I said, and this is true, it's not an exaggeration, in 10 years, I had 5 come back. 5.
That's amazing.
Come back. So it speaks to the fact that my people were they took their time to build it. I had pretty good instructions, and I designed it to be built as a kit from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I put parts far apart. I used holes a little bit bigger. I used thicker copper so that it wouldn't peel off the board, that kind of a thing. I supplied my own solder.
So in developing your the MOTM standard, one of the places where you saw it really take over then is in the DIY world, where I can't remember the name of the first people that did it, but eventually Bride Chamber was doing MOTM panels and stuff as well. So it kind of got to be a thing. Did these people interact with you and talk about where they were going with it, or did people just say, this is the standard and take off with it?
Well, no, that was pretty free. I mean, at first I was reluctant to publish stuff on the web, but, you can go to my website now and every single schematic is up there. It's, I was a little bit paranoid about, people copying my stuff, but then part of the way you can prevent people from copying is just make it so expensive nobody wants to copy it.
Right.
Kind of like, that's how, Rupert Neve does things. It's like, yeah, you can copy it, but it has a $300 transformer in there, knock yourself out.
Right.
So there's ways to kind of do that. And so once I kind of got over that, I decided I want other people to help me. So I had some people offer suggestions about better ways to make a bracket or better ways to, have hardware and things like that. Things, I'm not very mechanical. So I just said, fine. People said, they would always ask my permission. Is it okay if I do this? Is it okay if I do that? I said, sure. And it turns out when I decided to focus entirely on Eurorack, that I was able to sell all of my back inventory to Bride Chamber and to SynthCube, who purchased all that inventory. And in fact, Bride Chamber owns the name MOTM.
Oh, really?
So, yes. And so I do not own that name anymore. And that's why I was asked this question actually last week on Facebook. Why doesn't your Eurorack modules say MOTM's whatever? I don't own the name.
Interesting. I didn't realize
I own
that.
the name. I own the name Synthesis Technology.
Right.
That's the name of my company.
Right.
But it's actually SynthTech, but Synthesis Technology is my brand. So I didn't sell my brand. I just sold the MOTM part of it as part of the thing because I felt like if I didn't, I would always have my, this little line of control that wouldn't be fair to whoever bought it. But I don't have to be like Dave Smith. I'm not going to worry about getting my name back.
I was going to ask that.
No, I'm not going to do it Dave Smith or, maybe one day, Dave Rawson will get, EMU back or something. But I'm perfectly happy that Bride Chamber has MOTM and he supports that. And I'm able to help him support his family as well. So,
right.
So, and same for SynthCube, but Bride Chamber didn't take at the time, and SynthCube naturally stepped in and took some stuff, and he's picked up the DIY, and both of those guys do a great job. And I encourage people who still like to solder, I know you're out there, and to go to SynthCube and Bride Chamber and knock yourself out. And now you have in the Eurorack world, you have Funk over in the UK.
Right.
He's selling a lot of DIY stuff, and don't ask me to do DIY Eurorack because the answer is no.
Right. There you go.
I do sell, when people ask me, I will sell them the my soldered boards they can even put behind panels and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
It's all surface mount, and I'm never going back to anything but surface mount. Sorry.
Yeah. I saw that happen. I was at a NAMM show a couple of years ago, and I met up with you, and we were talking about how you were moving into Eurorack, and you pulled out your prototype. I think it was the E440. And you put it in my hand and you said, "This is my future." I saw it and I understood immediately.
Yeah, because the thing is the beauty of surface mount is what I call uniformity. They're made in such high volume that, and the machines now are so good, and the solder paste used is so good, and the fluxes are so good now that, the modules that I build on a technology scale for surface mount are laughable, okay? It's not like we're building the new iPhone here.
Right.
Okay. The parts that I use are huge compared to what the people are used to dealing with, okay? And I used to, I spent a year at BlackBerry designing phones, and the parts are so small, they're almost invisible to the naked eye. You really need a microscope to even see the parts on the board. And maybe just because I'm old, but it's very different technology, okay? And so people who are unfamiliar with it will look at one of my Eurorack boards and go, "God, I can't believe that's so small." It's the people who build it are going, "Ha ha ha! Look, it's like the battleships on the water over here."
Right. They can't believe how crude it is. They're
laughing. They're like, "You can still buy resistors that big?" So it's kind of interesting that we're on the stupid side of surface mount compared to where surface mount really is. But in our people who are familiar with the stuff and actually take the time to look at it, one of the things I'm always pet peeve of mine are people who say, "Oh, look, I've got this new module," and they only show the front panel. I'm like, I don't care what the front panel looks like. I want to see what the board looks like.
Right.
Don't show me the front panel. Show me the board. Okay? I don't care about the front panel. So I'm still, in fact, there's a Facebook group I'm a member of that's called "I Take Pictures of Electronic Parts." Honest to God. And it's people who go around and take pictures of circuit boards.
Oh, my.
And it's interesting to me because some of it's historical and some of it's people showing off like how dense the circuit boards really are.
Right.
And so it's also much more reliable. And I'm hoping that, there's still a few people who cling to the through-hole sounds better and blah, blah, blah. And I don't even, take part in those, discussions anymore because they generally can't be swayed and I can't be swayed. And so there's no reason to have an argument if you can't try to get some, ground towards the middle. Well,
doesn't that just end up turning into a different version of a religious discussion?
Generally it generally turns into someone with a master's in electrical engineering, me, talking to someone who doesn't.
Right.
And so there's not going to be a common base, okay? When Jürgen Hallwell, bless his soul, was still alive, he was my partner in a lot of the MOTM designs. He had a master's in double E. We could talk for hours and hours on the same level and get a lot done together without having to try to prove a point to each other.
Right, sure. Oh, absolutely.
And my current partner, Eric Brombaugh, who does all my DSP programming and helps me out in a lot of other different areas, who also does design for the companies. Again, he's a double E, used to work at Intel. We can talk and we don't have to try to prove to each other that we know what we're doing or try to prove a point, but we're way beyond that, okay? We just get right to the heart of the matter, and I'll say something, he says, "You're right." He'll say something like, "You're an idiot for doing it that way." I say, "I am an idiot," I fully admit that, it is tough for a lot of people to admit that they made a mistake or they don't know what they're doing or someone's smarter than they are or whatever. And I'm just not that person. I've always caught people off guard, especially, where I work now for a big semiconductor company, is I don't have an axe to grind, or I don't have a position that I'm trying to uphold. When someone comes to my office and says, you really made a mistake when you did this and this and this, I'll say, gosh, you're right. Thanks for pointing that out to me.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to a lot of people who try to cover up and say, no, you're wrong, and
Right.
I'm right, and all that kind of thing. So, I've always been willing, because that's how you learn. You learn by listening,
Sure.
So, but I think I did a fairly good job on the MOTM designs. They seem to be still holding their value after all these years. And
well, and I know a number of people have MOTM based systems, and they love them in a way that sort of the trading card activity among Euro modules doesn't seem to pull together. It seems like people really enjoy and love those systems.
I haven't really paid that much attention on the I trade forums on Modular and stuff, but I have not seen an MOTM module for sale in like 2 years.
Right. Yeah.
I think they pop up on eBay every now and then, but I still think that people keep them, especially if they themselves built it.
Right.
There's a sense of pride, and it's Heathkit for I grew up on Heathkit in the 60s. It was a major factor. I used to live within biking distance of a Heathkit store. Heathkit actually had a retail store in Houston, and it was part of, between that and Radio Shack, that was a big early influencer on me being where I am today.
Indeed.
That the perception that if I studied hard enough and I kept at it, I could do it too.
Sure.
Well,
now that kind of leads us in an interesting direction, which is in our earlier podcast, you talked some about the design work that you did at Radio Shack. You spent a good amount of time working for Tandy.
Right. Yeah, I started off there as a co-op, which I think people call now interns, but intern to me means a free co-op. I mean, I was actually paid not very much, mind you, minimum wage. But I was actually paid while I was working, and that was a program that I did with my undergraduate school, Texas A&M, that I didn't actually have to interview for the job. They just simply said, go to this address at this time, and there's a job for you there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it took all the pressure off.
Right.
And so I started there as a co-op, and then after I graduated, I worked 1 year for Data General and Austin building mini computers. Then they moved that group back to Boston and left me high and dry. I just picked up the phone, called my old boss at Tandy, said, I just got laid off. Can I come work back at Tandy? And he said, sure. That was it. I got in my car and drove up to Fort Worth and started working the next day.
Wow.
So I'm thankful that I co-opted Tandy. And I co-opted 3 times there, and then I worked there for 4 years from 80 to 84. And then I worked there for 5 years from about 91 to 96, roughly. Somewhere around there, right when AST bought Tandy and got rid of Radio Shack. Because to be technical, I didn't work for Radio Shack. I worked for Tandy. So Tandy was the electronic side, Radio Shack was the retail store side.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's how that works. Got it.
Right, yeah. See, and Tandy, even though they were a prime vendor to Radio Shack, there's 2 things to remember about Tandy. We weren't the only vendor to Radio Shack. I mean, the VCRs were from Hitachi. They sold Sony car stereos. They were branded Realistic, but they were made by Sony and Panasonic and stuff. So you go into a Radio Shack store, it may be 80% Tandy and 20%, private branded other stuff.
Right.
Okay. On the other hand, Tandy had a factory in Korea and also a telephone factory in Hong Kong, and we made products for people besides Radio Shack. We made Alpine car stereos.
Really? I didn't know that.
Well, it's not something that's well known.
Clearly.
Obviously. but we were what we now would call an ODM or a CM, okay, we would take bids. People would say, we have this thing to build, and they would send it to 50 different companies. We would all bid on it. If we were the low bidder or whatever, we would get the business.
Sure.
And stuff like that. And so it was a fast-paced environment. We didn't have team, okay? I don't understand to this day about, we're going to have a team, we're going to have a meeting, and we're going to have, a team leader. At Tandy, it was, you're going to design this computer, and you have 6 months to do it, go. It was one person, one job.
Wow.
Period. They didn't care what it was. It was one person, one job. On some of the later times, some of the bigger computers, they would say, have 2 people on it. Okay? And the biggest project team I was ever on was a Tandy 2000 computer that had 3 people on it. Okay? And so we all did something completely different that we didn't have to talk to each other, basically.
No, nobody would even be able to imagine that these days.
Yeah. Oh, and of course we had no equipment. I mean, the joke at Tandy was we all had a T-shirt that said, "Okay, who took my scope probe?" The management was unprepared to forecast a capital budget that was needed to design this stuff, especially when the computers started kicking in. Remember when I started at Tandy, computers were just starting. All right, they weren't a big runner. The biggest runner we had was cordless phones. Tandy was number 1 in the world in 47 megahertz cordless phones, number 1 in the world. And we sold like $100 million a year in cordless phones.
Oh, my goodness.
And we sold like $80 million a year in answer machines. Remember answer machines that had little cassettes in them? And
yes, I do.
for everybody under 30, there's a thing called a cassette that had tape on it that you could talk on and record stuff. And so Tandy was number 1 in the world in answering machines. Okay, so that was a big deal. Computers were new, but the management didn't understand that computers required a lot of expensive equipment, logic analyzers, and all this stuff. And they were thinking that you could design a computer in the same environment as a $49 answering machine.
Right.
And it took many, many years, and some can argue that they never wrapped their head around the fact that it's a different kind of environment, and the expectation level. You can't expect one poor guy to design a whole computer. You can design a voltmeter by yourself, but it's hard to design a computer by yourself. So we were woefully understaffed, and we were woefully under-budgeted in terms of the equipment that we had to do it. It's a miracle. It's almost like the space shuttle. It's a miracle the space shuttle doesn't blow up every time you send it off. And it's like a miracle that Tandy was able, in spite of that, successfully go as long as they could.
I remember the Model 100. There was a time where practically anybody that was writing on the go was using a Model 100.
Okay, so the Model 100 is an answer to a trivia question.
Oh, yeah?
Okay, so we can play Jeopardy. So if the answer is Model 100, the question is, what was the last physical computer that Bill Gates wrote code for? A Model 100. Bill Gates personally, by himself, pretty much wrote the entire operating system for the Model 100.
Get out.
Based on the 8085 microcontroller, all in assembly language, and that was his last major programming project.
That's amazing.
The Model 100. Yeah, and that computer was actually a co-design between us and a company called Kyocera, which was weird because Kyocera at the time was the world's largest ceramic company. And we're like, why does a ceramic company want to? Well, they're just going to branch out. That's what the Japanese were trying to divest themselves. Okay, and I designed the modem that's in the Model 100.
Did you? That's interesting.
So that was Bill Gates and I rocked on that one.
Yeah, there's a whole generation of journalists that were dependent on your modem working.
Well, sure. Here's what's interesting. Okay, if the average laptop today, if you turn it on and working, probably has, I don't know, between 7 and 9 hours of battery life.
Right.
Let's say Model 100 using 6 C cells had 12 days life. You could type on it for 12 days. 12 days. So how we got, of course, it runs at one 1/100th of the speed or something.
Right, and
But,
that
or
five.
1,000 is probably more like 1,000th of the speed. But it got the job done, and people liked it because it could run 12 days on batteries. And where did you buy those batteries? Radio
Shack. Well, because at
Radio
the time,
Shack loved it.
yeah,
Yeah, Radio Shack probably sold.
you would get your one battery a month if you were on the battery club.
Well, that's because it had 6 in there. I mean,
Right.
Radio Shack loved that kind of product because they would say that because we sold 50,000 Model 100s, consequently we sold 500,000 batteries. I mean, and people make fun of Radio Shack batteries, okay? The battery division of Radio Shack by itself was a $60 million a year company that had 70 points of gross margin.
Wow.
If you don't know what points of gross margin is, Google it and figure out what that means to basically multiply times 5.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And their batteries were still the best in the industry. Okay? They Consumer Reports would try to find a reason to poo-poo Radio Shack batteries, and they just kick tail everywhere.
Right.
And so Radio Shack, even though it was like a joke in the industry, they were laughing to the bank. There were people in $1 million houses because of Radio Shack batteries.
Yeah.
Okay, there were companies who came and went who could only wish they could sell like Radio Shack batteries.
Right. So how do you feel now about Radio Shack kind of on its way through the exit door?
I feel sad because, in a way, I met my wife at Radio Shack. She was a tech writer on the Model 3 and the Model 4. So if people out there who have a Model 3, or if their dads probably have a Model 3 or Model computer, or their grandfathers,
Right.
then my wife wrote all the manuals for those. Because it was a Fort Worth institution, at their peak, which was probably 1986, I think was the peak of Radio Shack, it was 1986. That's when they were like a $4 billion company back then, okay. They had like 25,000 employees in Fort Worth, 17 factories.
My goodness.
I mean, Radio Shack, if you went to Radio Shack and you bought some antenna wire, let's say you went to Radio Shack and you bought a TV antenna. For those of you who are young, you could get signals over the air with a thing called that was real ugly. You had to stick on your chimney or your roof. But if you went to Radio Shack and you bought an antenna, then you bought the wire for it. The antenna and the wire were made in 2 factories in Fort Worth. Okay? Radio Shack pulled their own wire. Copper ingots went in one end and wire came out the other end.
Mm-hmm.
They did not, every wire in every Radio Shack product was made by Radio Shack. We built our own TV antennas. I mean, metal went in one side and had these big giant vats of plating materials and anodizing, and antennas came out the other side. It's very, very huge economic driver for the city of Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's completely gone. I mean, it's kind of sad. I mean, Radio Shack had these 2 beautiful buildings downtown, and they built a technology center. In between them, they had an ice rink and a shopping mall in the buildings. They had a Borders bookstore, okay, where people used to read books. I mean, it was a whole community. I mean, you could go to work and eat lunch and go ice skating, and they had a Dillard's department store. You could go buy your work clothes and go home. It was great. Also, I won't deny the fact that Tandy was in one tower and Radio Shack was in the other. But if you look at the employees in these 2 towers at the time in the 80s, it was about 90% female.
Mm-hmm.
And for a single guy in the 80s, working in a company that was 90% female was pretty exciting at the time. And like I said, that's where I met my wife. And so
Right.
we both missed Radio Shack. It was a family thing. There was a huge softball tournament. It was the peak of the Tandy social calendar was this massive, it was like the Final Four. There were like 64 teams playing softball. And it was like these marathon weekends, and sometimes alcohol was a factor, but it was a great time, and I really missed those days. I think that it was inevitable that Radio Shack never really found their footing after about 2002, 2003.
Yeah.
And again, I'm surprised they lasted this long. I mean, it's just the fact that people don't tinker, and the fact that electronics is devalued.
Yeah.
Remember, when I was growing up, think about this. When I was growing up, why was there even a Heathkit? How could Heathkit even have a retail store? Because if you wanted something really good electronics, it was actually cheaper to build it yourself.
Right.
Plus, there was this sort of Asian bias at the time of the 60s that, oh, if it's from overseas, it's garbage.
Right, right.
Okay, rah, USA, whatever. And there was some truth to that, okay? But now, there is no foreign bias, okay? Because everything's made overseas anyway, okay? So if you want it, it's going to come from China whether you like it or not. And people think everything should cost $100, no matter what it is.
Right.
All right? I mean, when I was working on, one of the things I worked on at Tandy was we designed our own CD players, and we actually designed our own basic chips in the CD players. Partly for money, partly for patent reasons, but I did a lot of research one year on how to read data off of a CD disk, both CD-ROM, and I was stunned about how complicated it is. Of course, all that's hidden from most people. They pick up a CD and they shove it in and they expect it to work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But it's a huge amount of technology behind that people don't value it. They think that a CD, or now, of course, it's the DVD. So if you go to a company like Newegg and say, I want a DVD Blu-ray burner for my computer, and it's not $19, you go, poof.
Right, right.
And I'm thinking, do you have any idea what's in there? Do you have any idea what's going on? And the answer is no, but we don't care because we don't value that anymore. I mean, I grew up in an era in the 60s and the 70s where electronics were still mysterious.
Right.
And people were in awe of electronics, okay? I'm sure I could go today to any college in America and to their electrical engineering department and say, I have $1,000 if you can tell me how broadcast color TV works. I walk up to the whiteboard and say, from the camera to a color TV over the air, basically what is going on. They would have no idea. Okay? Because it's not valued. It's like, well, I don't know. It's some kind of MPEG. I go, no. No, it's not that. And it's like, well, other people do it. So we're in a society now where the mysterious others, I call it the others, do it. Okay? I mean, most of our parents and my grandparents grew up in a farming kind of culture.
Right.
Everyone had a garden. Everybody grew stuff.
Yep.
Ask a high school student today, where do carrots come from? I mean, where they grow in the ground, above the ground, on a vine, on a tree, a carrot. Some of them wouldn't have any idea.
At this point, I'm not sure that any of them would know what the actual shape of a carrot is because they just get them in the shape. It comes in a little bag, and it's in my Thai food. Right, exactly.
But I'm saying is because the mysterious others do that. Okay,
right.
You go to the stores and it's all laid out for you. You don't have to think about it, and that's what I'm kind of despondent because I grew up with electronics being the most magical but real thing you could possibly think of, and that's even tied into the space program. Like, Can you believe we're walking on the moon? Although some people don't, but and then we come to today where I'm just thankful that at least Eurorack modules aren't devalued, that people haven't decided every Eurorack module should be $29.
Right.
Of course, now there is talk at NAMM, the big buzz at NAMM is that some of the bigger players are going to get into Eurorack, maybe going to that, I don't know. But at least for right now, I am happy that in my little world of modulars, it's still valued. But it's hard to find anything else, is there? I mean, people will value my 350 VCO more than they value a smartphone.
Right.
Even though a smartphone's got 3,000 times more technology in it than my E350, it sells for twice as much as a smartphone.
Well,
Because it still has some value to it. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, true enough. I mean, so what is how do we get people involved in enjoying unraveling the mysteries of electronics again? I mean, the maker movement is trying. There are different groups that seem to be oriented towards getting people re-involved in the creation of stuff. Do you think that's going to get traction, or do you think there's another thing that could happen, or do you think it's a lost cause?
I don't know. I'm slightly skeptical about I'm still on the fence about the whole 3D printing thing.
Yeah.
I think what's going to happen is people are more interested in the results of the 3D printer than the 3D printer itself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In other words, people are going to sit there and complain about the color of this isn't exactly right, or I can't get this resolution of the nozzle, or the stupid strings cost too much, and I'm like, shut up! You've got this thing on your desk that does all this stuff, and you're bitching about the string and the color is not the right yellow.
Right.
But that's again part of. I think I have a 22-year-old son and a 29-year-old daughter that grew up on the fact that everything is Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean, I can remember in high school in the 70s. There was a very influential magazine called Popular Electronics that was a very big DIY, build this stuff every month kind of stuff. I read every issue 50 times. And they would always say, will there ever be a flat TV? And they had scientists arguing about it's impossible to make a flat TV, or you can't make one any thicker, any thinner than 4 inches because of the electron beams, because they didn't even know about TFT transistors, okay? They were thinking electron beams.
Right.
And they were right until someone comes up with the TFT, LCD transistor thing, which is like, a transistor that you can see through until you turn it on, and you can't, and let's make a TV out of that. And all of a sudden now you have people trying to make them, as thin as they possibly can. Like every 1/10 of a millimeter is reason to throw something in the trash.
Right.
Just look at Apple and the Airs. It's a 1/10 of a millimeter thicker, pays $10,000.
Right.
Yeah. So pretty soon you can use it for a Ginsu knife and just chop your leg off if you drop it on your foot. That's all hidden from people. I mean, I grew up, building computers. I don't know. I mean, how many people today who aren't avid gamers,
right,
build their own computer, thinking I can save some money if I buy this motherboard and do this and learn and do, the gaming people do it just because that's part of the nature of it.
It's part of the culture, right?
But people who aren't gaming, and that's going to end because the new NVIDIA cards are so fast. No matter what you build, it's not going to matter. Is that people are interested in the end result now? Okay, they don't care how Facebook works, but they're happy there's Facebook, right? They don't care how Twitter is set up or how it's even done, or even how can you take a picture and compress it and send it. The mysterious others do it, right? It's the others. And it's gone from the farming others to the electronic others to now the coding others.
Right.
To the maker others. I mean, because I think what's going to happen in the make when you talk about 3D kind of stuff is that people are going to be interested in the end result, which is I want an application on my phone that I can draw my own, like I can license all the Marvel comic library, and so I can make my own Iron Man and push a button and then over Bluetooth it goes to my maker printer, and out comes an Iron Man figure.
Right. And that's how you get toys now. Right.
They don't. The fact that you can even do that isn't impressive because in their world they've always been able to do it. It's kind of like, I always grew up loving antiques and going to antique stores and things like that. And I'm seeing now where I don't think by the year 2030 there's going to be an antique store in America, because the people who are now, they're like, why do I want an old, creepy old bed? I'll just go to IKEA and buy that pretty one over there.
Right,
you know?
right.
Because they don't care about the history, like, well, because the IKEA new bed used to be this old, weird bed over here. And they go, well, I don't want that weird bed anymore. I just want the latest and greatest thing. And so it's a hard question. I'm glad that there's the cord little bits that are out there.
Right.
I wish I invented it, you know. Shame on me for not thinking that up. But I think that's just a small number of people. Okay. I think that the Eurorack is kind of going to be like a last gasp, and I don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, I'm asked that a lot. You know, is it this year? Is it next year? Is it going to go forever? You know, we're going to have 20,000 modules at some point. Is it going to implode under its own weight? And I'm like, I don't care. I got to ship. I'm behind already. You know, I'm going to keep my head down
right.
And when it implodes, it's going to implode,
and hopefully it implodes on someone else, right?
Hopefully I won't have a garage full of parts.
Right.
You know, that's my only worry, is that it implodes on an up inventory cycle. You know,
right on.
That's my only worry, because if you get caught on those wrong cycles, I mean, like right now, I'm sitting here looking at $23,000 of bills I have to pay this month for parts that are sitting in boxes for a module that I haven't even gotten to production yet.
Right.
You know, so it's a vicious cycle of cash flow, and I think that eventually is the death of a lot of people who get into this business thinking it's great, and then you get to a certain level that you dream about, and then all of a sudden you're writing these $10,000 checks all the time.
Right.
And then you start thinking, oh my God, you know, this is a really expensive thing. You know, it kind of exploded. And so it's tough to get people. You know, people ask me, why don't you go back full circle? Why don't you come out with some boards again? People, 15 years have passed, so everyone knows about Mauser and DigiKey, and you don't have to count anymore. But people still like to solder, and you can get boards a lot cheaper now, and the boards are higher quality. And I don't know, I might. You know, we'll see. You know, because I'm hoping to retire. I'm officially, less than 7 years from retirement age, according to my wife. So I'm always looking for something to tinker with. I'm a hopeless tinker, and I think that's something that you're kind of born with, that you always think stuff is cool. I mean, why else would I subscribe to a group that takes pictures of the electronic circuit?
Right.
I mean, because I still think they're cool. And maybe eventually through the modular stuff, it'll slowly grow, and people will come back and say, this electronic stuff is pretty cool. That's what I'm thinking. I don't think people think DVD players are cool, laptops are cool, or even their cell phones are cool. Really. I mean, they're fans. I mean, they'll argue for hours and hours about Apple versus Android, but I don't see any arguments arguing over, megahertz and gigahertz and pixels and, DSP voice compression algorithms, right? It's more of a corporate arguing rather than a feature arguing.
Right.
People don't even argue that much in Eurorack, really, which is surprising. They seem to be, for such a large variable group that has all kinds of, billions of combinations of things that could possibly go wrong, it seems to be fairly even-tempered.
Yeah, this is true. Well, I think some of that is just the nature of how that community kind of re-emerged from, from the ooze. You have to kind of give Mike McGrath some credit for putting together a community in the Muff Wiggler world that sort of was like a great new place to reintroduce some of this stuff. So
right, because again, it's new if you've never seen it before.
Right.
But you have people like me who's been around it since the '60s versus people who just discovered it yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, and that's very rare in the musical world. You don't
Right.
have people who say, "What is this electric guitar that you speak of?"
Right.
You know, I mean, but you still have that in modular.
Yeah,
And then
you
once
do.
you get into modular, then you get overboarded with, what is this Zorlon cannon? What is this morphing terrarium? You know?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting to me actually is that people have a desire to get into modulars and they're asking questions like, what is a VCA? And you're sort of like, man, how did you even get into this? And then you realize that, you know, there's a certain amount of fashion involved too, I guess. So,
Yeah, you know, what's interesting is Control Voltage in Portland, Oregon, that's a retail store.
right.
You know, they have like once a month, they have like come into the store on a Saturday and we'll give a little, modular 101 lecture. And it's thrown over to like 150 people show up.
Yeah.
You know, so it's pretty amazing. I mean, I went to Control in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
and talked about some of my upcoming modules and stuff. And it's a pretty small store, but it was packed full of people. And so there's still, more than 500 people interested.
Right. There's hope, right?
Let's hope. My MOTM the loyal 500 MOTM people, there's probably a loyal 50,000, in Europe. So
Right, indeed.
hopefully it'll keep going. Hopefully we not just me, but the other manufacturers won't run out of things to do.
Right, right.
One of the things that's interesting is that there's only so much you can do with op amps and transistors. And now you start going to DSP, but then eventually everybody's going to start sticking Raspberry Pi 2s behind panels, and then what do you do?
Right, indeed.
And so we can't all be running Max MSP on every single thing. So
Well,
it's going to be interesting to see if people can delineate not only in the lower analog modules, but in the digital modules as well.
right.
So that it just doesn't reduce to, I stuck this Intel i7 Xenon 16 processor behind the panel,
Yeah, although it seems like it is racing that direction,
But I don't know if that's a good direction to race to. Okay,
I'm not
it's
sure
like
either. I agree.
I have a friend in high school I grew up with who was, I was the electrical guy, he was the aerospace guy.
Mm-hmm.
I co-opted Tandy, he co-opted NASA.
Oh,
Okay. I worked all the electrical companies. He's worked 32 years at Boeing. Okay. But when we were in high school and college, we started off with hang gliders, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so he literally got 3 sticks and some tarp and jumped off the roof, okay? And then he bought this other hang glider that was this. And then he bought a hang glider that was a wing. And then he put a motor on it. And he got a power. I'm like, wait a minute, you're turning into an airplane.
Yeah, right, exactly.
You realize what you're doing? You start out with a hang glider, and you're just moving to airplanes, And so that's what I'm worried about in the modulars.
Yeah.
We start off with simple building blocks, and we're all going to iPads.
Right, exactly.
Where every single module is turned into an iPad. I'm like,
Right.
wait. I don't want every module to be an iPad. Okay. There's still things to do, but it is going to become harder as a manufacturer, which means it's harder as a retail consumer to go to modular grid and type in VCA and see 74 VCA.
Right. Yeah.
So people will say, "Why don't you make VCAs?" And I said, "Because there's 74 of them."
Right.
Why would make the 75th one great? And they go, "Because your name is on it." I'm like, oh, please.
Yeah.
Although there are some people who like all the modules from the same vendor.
Yeah, there are, surprisingly.
Yeah, there are people who have, I have a Pittsburgh system, I have a Make Noise system, I have an IntelliGel system.
Mm-hmm.
And they look up at me and go, good for you, because I don't have this over here.
Right.
I'm not
You're not going there.
I'm not going there, and probably because I'm just bandwidth limited, but probably because I don't want to be in that business model.
Sure.
I'm not trying to build, because then what will happen is then you'll build tabletop systems, and then you'll put keyboards on them, and then like everyone has an MX12.
Yeah.
It looks like an iPad. Because the people tend to run over to this one side, right? They run over to one side, and I don't want to be, in that path of everybody running towards that one direction.
Right. Yeah, that's smart. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm gonna hang my hat now on this chat being all about how to make a Matrix 12 out of your iPad. That's okay. The way I'm going to advertise it. I'm going to say Paul Schreiber tells us how to. But
in this podcast, Paul Schreiber compares Matrix 12s to iPad.
That's right. There you go. That'll get some
Sounds
attention.
Sounds like a typical Facebook clickbait thing, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. It does. I want to thank you so much for your time. Boy, we really, I was hoping to be under an hour, and we're barely squeezing it under 2. But
it's the super deluxe podcast.
That's exactly right.
2 hours for the price of 1.
Exactly.
Unless there's some severe editing going on, it turns out on the website to be 32 minutes. But that's okay.
Well, it's gonna be. I'll say, here's Paul Schreiber, and then it'll be just your voice going, "I made a Matrix 12 out of an iPad,"
well,
and then I'll be like, "Well, thanks."
Maybe I hit number 1 with that. That's all I need for a number 1 clickbait.
Number 1 with a bullet. That's right. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you taking the time this evening to spend talking with me. It was really fantastic, as always.
All right. Thanks, Darwin. Bye.
All right. Bye. And there you go. Podcast number 72 in the bag. Again, I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank Paul for taking a lot of time. This is a long one. But again, when I get a chance to talk to Paul, I don't want to hang up the phone too quickly. So it was a pretty amazing discussion. Thanks for listening. Thanks for telling your friends. Tell some more of your friends. It's all great. I just love to make sure that people are listening to this. And beyond that, I will catch you next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.